The silence that matters is not found in the mountain peaks or the deep, dark forests. The true silence is the cessation of the lies you tell yourself. The world is a roaring lie. It screams of permanence, stability, and structure. A brittle temple built of soft wood and weaker men. Look around. You are told you are safe. You are told the law is an unbreakable shield forged by generations of wisdom. They sell you the illusion of order, whispering comfort when what you need is the rough hand of truth. They promise the iron bars of the cage will protect you from the beasts outside, but they fail to mention that the cage itself is the beast. The barbarian knows this. He hears the sound of the lock snapping before the civilized man even recognizes the hunger in his own belly. The law is not an eternal axiom. It is ink on parchment, dependent entirely on the strength of the fist holding the quill and the sword guarding the border. When that fist weakens or the sword rusts, the law becomes dust. This is the law of Cimmeria. Survival is the only statute. Everything else is a plea. Stick with me. We are walking away from the walls of the city to examine the true architects of your survival. The city is a magnificent illusion, a massive, ornate box designed to keep the harsh geometry of the world at bay. They call it progress, these towers of glass and steel. We call it a tomb for the reflexes. You walk on paved roads, assuming the foundation is solid, but beneath every layer of smooth concrete is the original dirt, waiting for the rain to turn it back to mud. Civilization is built not on stone, but on belief. Belief that the farmer will plant, the guard will remain loyal, and the coin you hold will buy tomorrow's meat. This is the great deception. You have traded innate personal power for a shared vulnerability. You have given up the sharp, immediate wisdom of the wilderness, the knowledge that if you fail, you die, for the soft, delayed consequences of bureaucracy. You are dependent on the fragile threads of logistics, legislation, and manufactured trust. The civilized man looks at a locked door and sees security. The barbarian sees a delay. The structures that currently define your life, the banks, the courts, the regulatory bodies, they are merely scaffolding. Scaffolding that obscures the true ancient reality, that only personal strength, adaptability, and the resources you can physically defend truly matter. The moment the belief system shatters, the scaffolding falls, revealing the primal landscape underneath. That moment is always closer than you think. You have exchanged the certainty of the axe for the promise of the pen. The anomaly always begins small, like a single thread fraying in a massive rope. It's never the explosion you anticipate. It's the quiet erosion of faith. Consider the events that shatter the illusion, not the grand military conquest, but the moment the municipal garbage collection stops, not the revolution, but the day the power grid fails and the automated teller machine refuses your plea for $20. This is the failure point, the incident. When the system is strong, law is a formality. The consequences of breaking it are swift and certain. But when the system wavers, when the institutions lose their credibility, when the central promise of stability breaks, the law itself becomes optional. Look at the data. In every economic collapse, from Weimar Germany to modern-day Venezuela, the first thing to vanish is not the currency, but the respect for contractual obligation. A contract is just a promise, backed by the implicit threat of state violence. Remove that threat, and the paper becomes worthless. The man who obeys the speed limit today because of a $200 fine is the same man who loots the grocery store tomorrow when the police radios go silent. He does not respect the law. He respects the consequence. When the consequence evaporates, the true nature of man, which the law sought to cage, is immediately released. The beast is already inside the walls. It just needed the door to rust open. The civilized man clings to the lie, arguing that such collapse is impossible because we are different now. They point to their treaties, their technology, their complexity, convinced that the sheer intricacy of their society guarantees its survival. This is Cimmerian laughter in the face of hubris. Complexity does not create strength, it creates more points of failure. A simple stone shield might bear 100 blows. An intricate machine fails when a single, minuscule gear snaps. They resist the truth because the truth requires radical self-reliance, a state they have actively worked to eradicate from their souls. Their faith is misplaced in systems they cannot control, managed by people they do not know. When you tell them to prepare, to harden themselves, to possess skills that do not rely on an app or an electrical current, they call you paranoid. They trust the government to secure their future. We, the barbarians, trust the weight of the axe in our hands. The difference is tactile, immediate, and final. Their skepticism is the soft wool they pull over their eyes, preferring the comfortable darkness to the blinding sunlight of reality. The law is a promise that someone else will protect you. When that promise is broken, those who believed it become sheep, waiting for the slaughter. The barbarian never waits. He hunts. The methodology of survival is grim and simple. It is the application of Stoic philosophy to a world that demands immediate violence. It is not about passive acceptance. It is about ruthless preparation for the inevitable. First, identify what you control. You do not control the whims of the market, the decisions of distant politicians, or the honesty of your neighbor. You control your mind, your physical condition, and the immediate resources you acquire. The civilized man attempts to control the uncontrollable. He complains about politics, he obsesses over stock charts, and he attempts to legislate morality. The barbarian accepts the brutal limits of his influence. He focuses his energy on honing his spear and hardening his will. This is the barbarian's Stoicism. Prepare for the worst possible outcome, not as a pessimist, but as a practical realist. If the law fails, what is your fallback? If your money is digital dust, what is your wealth? The core action is detachment from fragile systems and attachment to unbreakable principles. The principle of competence, the principle of personal responsibility, the principle that your greatest weapon is your ability to endure more than the man next to you. This is the only method that history has proven fail-safe. Everything else is reliance on a prayer written in bureaucracy. The first revelation is the nature of true wealth. It is not denominated in fiat currency or secured by a digital ledger. The first true asset is hard, cold metal, the enduring value of gold and silver. The economists of the city sneer at it, calling it a relic, a non-performing asset. They speak of derivatives and algorithms. They speak of promises. The barbarian sees the history written in the veins of the earth. Every paper empire collapses back into the dust from which it arose, but the metal remains. Go back to Berlin, 1923. The mark bought bread in the morning and wallpaper by night. The man who held ounces of silver, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, survived the hyperinflation. Not because the metal grew in value, but because its inherent value, its ability to concentrate energy and command utility, did not diminish when the collective hallucination of the paper money ended. Physical, tangible resources are the true shield. When the law fails to protect property, property becomes defined by what you can physically defend. And gold, heavy, dense, and internationally recognized, is the smallest, most transportable form of preserved human effort. It is the language of trade spoken when all other languages have failed. This is the anti-fragile asset. It requires no government, no central bank, and no trust. It simply is. It is the antithesis of the ephemeral promises that comprise civilization's law. Why does metal work when paper fails? The mechanism is simple and brutal: scarcity and utility. A government can print 1 billion bills overnight, diluting your savings to dust. The paper law says this is acceptable, but the earth cannot quickly create new gold. The energy required to pull a single ounce of metal from the ground is immense, tangible, and non-negotiable. The law of the civilized world is backed by credit, the belief in future production. The barbarian's wealth is backed by past, hard-won labor, crystallized in a physical form. Furthermore, the law of the market is exchange. In a crisis, the highest value is placed on assets that possess universal desire but extreme difficulty of creation. Gold meets this criteria whether you are in Rome, Samaria, or a post-collapse megacity. When the law breaks, the only functioning system is direct barter, and gold acts as the most fungible, non-perishable unit of accounting. It simplifies chaos. You cannot carry a cow or a year's worth of grain across borders, but you can carry an ingot. The fragility of the modern banking system is its reliance on digital ledger entries and institutional enforcement. If the power grid goes dark for a week, your bank balance is meaningless data. Gold does not require a password, a power source, or a contract enforced by a judge. It requires only a scale and a strong hand to hold it. This is the difference between true security and an assumed safety. The consequence of ignoring these primal truths is financial and existential destruction. The man who trusts the printed promise wakes up one morning and finds that 90% of his life savings can buy only a loaf of bread if he is lucky. This is the brutal math of hyperinflation. Not a slow bleed, but a sudden amputation of purchasing power. You didn't lose the money lost its meaning. But the real consequence runs deeper than currency. When the law collapses, the social contract dissolves. The meek, who rely on the police force and the court system to enforce their rights, suddenly have no rights at all. They become targets. This is the hard, cold lesson of history. Law is a luxury afforded only by stable power. When power decentralizes into chaos, survival becomes a competition for finite resources, backed by immediate strength. If you have spent your life optimizing for convenience, relying on delivered food, remote work, and digital transactions, you're optimizing for fragility. When the systems that enable convenience fail, you are left utterly exposed, unable to adapt, unable to provide. The weak are consumed by the strong, not necessarily through malice, but through the hard necessity of life continuing. That is the ultimate consequence of believing in the illusion of guaranteed safety. The second mystery of survival is the raw, untradeable asset of competence. It is not listed on any stock exchange, yet it commands the highest price when the law is dead. The city values specialization, the analyst, the coder, the middle manager. Their skills rely entirely on the infrastructure staying intact. The barbarian values generalization, the hunter, the healer, the builder. Skills rooted in the physical necessary demands of existence. Ask yourself, if the lights go out for a year, which man survives better? The lawyer who can dissect a tax code, or the man who can field dress a deer and preserve meat without refrigeration? The knowledge in the lawyer's head is dust. The knowledge in the hunter's hands is life. This competence is your second and perhaps most critical shield. It is the ability to generate wealth and security entirely independent of the formal system. It is the muscle memory of starting a fire with friction, the knowledge of which root kills and which root cures, the absolute certainty of how to operate the heavy steel in your hand. When the centralized system collapses, value flows to those who can solve immediate, life-threatening problems. Your competence is a currency that cannot be devalued by central banks or seized by government decree. It is physically integrated into your being. It is the ultimate insurance policy against the chaos the law attempts and fails to prevent. This is not the first age of civilized law. This pattern is cyclical, ancient, and predictable. Go back to the fall of Rome. The legions retreated, the roads decayed, and the bureaucratic laws concerning property and taxes became meaningless scribbles. The powerful currency, the denarius, ceased to be accepted. What survived? Local, hard assets, and the ability of small, organized groups to defend themselves against roving bands. Look at the history of money. Every fiat currency ever created, every piece of paper backed solely by the promise of the state, eventually returned to its intrinsic value of zero. Every single one. This is not history repeating itself. This is history refusing to stop. The law of the land is merely a temporary imposition upon the law of nature. The law of nature states, energy must be acquired and defended. The larger image shows civilization as a brief, warm season. Men grow soft in the sun, trusting the harvest will always arrive. But winter, the period of chaos and collapse, is the dominant cycle. It is the natural resting state of human existence. To ignore this cycle is to misunderstand fundamental physics. Order requires constant, intense energy input. Chaos requires none. The laws designed to maintain order are always fighting entropy, and entropy always wins, eventually. Prepare for the inevitable return to the default setting. Prepare for the cold. What remains when the walls fall? Not the contracts, not the stock certificates, and certainly not the political ideology that fueled the collapse. The legacy of the civilized world is the broken concrete, the rusted rebar, and the silent database servers. The structures that remain are the ones built not for comfort, but for defense. Your future, if you choose the barbarian path, is defined by resilience. The legacy you leave is not one of wealth held in a vault, but of skills passed down. The ability to rebuild, to grow, to protect. Stoicism teaches that virtue is the sole good. In the context of the collapsing world, virtue is defined by your usefulness to your immediate community and your mastery over self. The man who maintains his discipline when the crowd descends into panic, who retains his rationality when fear becomes the dominant currency. This man owns the future. The future does not belong to those who wait for the law to save them, but to those who become the law themselves, the arbiters of order in their immediate sphere. When the dust settles, the only meaningful legacy is the strength of the bloodline and the integrity of the land under your feet. Everything else is wind. The law is an illusion, a necessary, sometimes beautiful, but always temporary agreement made in a moment of strength. When that strength fades, the agreement is nullified by the reality of nature. The warning is simple, urgent, and final. Stop outsourcing your safety. Stop relying on institutional promises. The moment you believe the law will protect you from the true horrors of human nature and economic failure, you have already lost the battle. The only real law is the law of consequence. What you do today defines what you can withstand tomorrow. Are you building a fragile palace of dependence or forging an unbreakable will? Hard assets, hard skills, and the hard truth of stoic detachment. These are your shields. Do not wait for the collapse to confirm the lie. Prepare now, become useful, become hard, and when the cities burn and the paper laws crumble to ash, you will not be among the panicked sheep. You will be the man who understands that strength, not statute, rules the world. Tell me, what skill do you possess that the collapse of the electric grid cannot erase? What asset do you hold that requires zero trust in government? Let the weak argue about politics. We will discuss survival.